What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're going to try to do a little bit of scrying, really some educated guessing. See if we can look into the future and tell what the format's going to look like just a month from now. Here are my top 10 decks to look out for come rotation. Now, this list comes with the usual disclaimer that we don't know what's in Guilds of Ravnica, obviously, but I have used the guilds that we know are going to be in that set to inform some of my choices, and honestly, regardless of what's in that set, I think there are some picks for decks that are just going to be slam dunks on almost no matter what's in that set. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and get to it with an honorable mention, because you know that's how I always have one. So, with that in mind, let's talk about blue-red wizards for just a second. Now, the only thing keeping this off of the list proper is the fact that we lose Soulscar Mage to rotation. That is going to hurt both the blue-red Wizards deck and the mono-red Wizards deck, for that matter, which has been popping up a lot more lately as a response to Turbo Fog. Now, the reason it's so good against Turbo Fog is because it's effectively just a burn deck. It's a very fast burn deck that uses Wizard's Lightning to great effect and Vashino Pyromancer to help fire it off, but also Getsu Lava Runner and Soulscar Mage. It's very important that that deck have a, especially red Wizard 1-drop. Now, I think it's entirely possible, though, that we get something to replace it in Guilds of Ravnica, whether it's a red 1-drop wizard or even a blue 1-drop wizard. The Izzet Guild is going to be in Guilds of Ravnica, and there's an awful lot of wizards in the Izzet Guild, so it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a couple of really good pieces to help carry the blue-red wizard deck along. Not only is Wizard's Lightning a proven and super effective standard card, but Adeliz is really, really good, too, if you're going all the way and building blue-red. And Adeliz especially looks like she gets better in a format without efficient removal. No fatal push. Red decks aren't going to play 6 or 7 lightning strikes anymore because they lose a braid, they lose harness lightning. They'll still play the lightning strikes, but you won't have to worry about more than the usual, play set of lightning strike being played like you do nowadays. So I think that just small, efficient, or even lower toughness creatures in general get a little bit better because of some of the removal exiting the format, and Adeliz might be a great example of that. She's obviously a beast. But on to the actual list here, and we'll start with Merfolk at number 10. Now, settle in, because you're going to see a lot of tribal on this list. There's a bunch of tribes that have been chomping at the bit for almost a year at this point. By the time Guilds comes out, all these Ixalan tribes will have existed for a year and not really have done squat. So it might be their time to finally take the spotlight. And Merfolk is definitely in the running here, but I actually am not 100% sure about the Merfolk deck, and that's why it's down here at number 10. Now, the deck does lack any meaningful interaction like Simic decks usually do. Plus, the Simic Guild actually won't come around to help out Merfolk until the winter set, so we're going to have to wait another 3 or 4 months for that set to come out. Now, there could be some help, in Guilds of Ravnica. That set has obviously, 2 green guilds and 2 blue guilds, so we may see some options for the Merfolk deck in those guilds, but I think that Simic is obviously what we're all waiting for to get the most help for a blue-green deck. Makes sense. That said, though, Merfolk does have some good setups, and Merfolk really benefits from the fact that, even though it doesn't have a whole lot of interaction, other colors lose a lot of meaningful interaction, What I said about Fatal Push and the fact that, red decks can't play 6 lightning strikes anymore, that actually is a huge deal when it comes to creatures like Merfolk Mistbinder and Deeproot Elite and these little, mini lords that Merfolk plays. So I think that might help Merfolk go a long way. Your Merfolk Mistbinder is way safer in a world without Fatal Push. Kumina even benefits a lot from some of the removal that's rotating out of the format. This isn't going to get hit by Fatal Push ever again. That makes all the difference in the world. And something I'll bring up multiple times in the video, no Chandra, no Glorybringer in red. There's going to be far fewer ways for red to deal 4 damage to a creature with a really good card. There's still a way that they can, but I wouldn't call a card really, really good. Not on the level of Chandra or Glorybringer. Red has this pretty big spread of options for hitting creatures with 4 toughness, and they don't usually have that ability, but they have for 2 years at this point, So once cards like Chandra and Glorybringer rotate out of the format, creatures with 4 toughness are just going to be much better positioned by default, and Kumina goes in with that. But here we are at number 9, which is vampires. And again, there's going to be tribes, so get ready for that. But in any case, I think that vampires is just, as a natural matter, of course, better than Merfolk, because it does have all the amazing interaction that Merfolk lacks. These are two of the best removal base colors in all of Magic. They've got the removal. So as far as interaction goes, got it locked down. I like that. Plus the payoffs are probably just better in general than Merfolk. You know, we've got a Merfolk Mistbinder with, one would argue, a better creature type. I'll throw a little shade. You know, we've got exactly Merfolk Mistbinder, but for vampires, and you know, this is just as good if Fatal Push leaves the format. It benefits just as much as Mistbinder. So there's that too. Plus there's other good vampire payoffs. You know, I've always liked Sanctum Seeker, and even Champion of Dusk is like actually pretty ridiculous. So I think that Vampires is much better positioned than Merfolk, but I still think there are some issues with Vampires in that even though the payoffs are better than Merfolk, they're still not as good as some of the other payoffs in other tribal decks and just other better standard decks that don't even have a tribal theme to begin with, you know. Again, payoffs are good, but are they the best in the format? I would argue no. Now at number 8, I've got another black-white tribal group, actually, and that's Knights. I think that they are just better than Vampires in most ways, you know. Not only do we get Knight of Grace and Knight of Malice, I think these are better 2-drops than just about anything Vampires has to offer, but we also obviously get History of Benalia, which is just a bonkers card. It's just a stupid card in and of itself. So we get that too. We're definitely going to play that. Plus, you know, the new Lord that came out in Core Set, that's actually not a bad card for 4 mana. But if we're looking for awesome 4 mana plays for Knights, we also get a Johnny, you know. It's ridiculous for bringing back any of our 2-drop or even 1-drop Knights for that matter. And yeah, I know Vampires can play a Johnny to pretty good effect, but I just think that Knights is the deck to play if you want to get the most value out of a Johnny. Number 7, though, is Goblins. Definitely, in my mind, as a metric of like how much better a deck gets, you know, once rotation hits, I think this might be, all in all, the most improved deck come autumn, because this is just going to, I would say, you know, it really all depends on guilds, obviously, but in a lot of ways I expect Goblins to replace the current mono red deck, you know. Not only does it also get to play Goblin Chain Whirler, and really easily because it's a dedicated red deck, but it arguably gets more use out of Goblin Chain Whirler because of the tribal theme. And I've already talked about this at length, did a whole deck tech about it and all that. You know, I've made my feelings on Goblins very, very clear. But, you know, obviously, just to cement things, Mono Red loses like 10 pieces to rotation. More if you count sideboard pieces than you should. So, Mono Red is going to be in shambles post-rotation, but you can actually build a pretty darn good Goblin deck with whatever you got left. So, if Mono Red Wizards doesn't get the pieces it needs to survive, I think Goblins is going to be the deck that all the red players want to play. But to contrast with number 7, number 6 is mono white, and I know that sounds crazy considering Goblin Chain Whirler is what's currently keeping mono white out of the format. You know, we can't play these awesome 1 toughness, 1-drop white creatures. We got Dauntless Bodyguard, we got Sky Marcher Aspirant, we got more than that too. But we just can't play them. We just assume we can't play them because Goblin Chain Whirler is in the format, period. And I think that that's actually folly, and I think that we'll learn that come rotation because Goblin Chain Whirler is super prevalent right now. It's in 50% of the meta, by and large, by most accounts. It's in about 1 out of 2 decks that you're going to come up against on the other side of the table. And that is a ridiculous ratio, and yeah, that does shut out 1 toughness creatures. But all that being said, after rotation, even though I think Goblins is really improved, I don't think it's anywhere near as strong a deck as the current mono red or red black list that utilize Chain Whirler, and there's going to be a dip in popularity. Mono red will no longer be, you know, 50% of the meta. It'll be lucky if it's 20 or 30% of the meta. So the fact that we'll see so much fewer Goblin Chain Whirlers leads me to believe that cards like Legion's Landing, Dauntless Bodyguard, and Sky Marcher Aspirant are going to once again be playable, especially along with cards like Militia Bugler, and the Yeoman War Leader looks fantastic in a format without cards that just completely shut it out, you know. And there are still going to be ways to kill a Yeoman War Leader, but there are going to be far fewer good and widely played ways to kill a War Leader. So I think that that's another reason Mono White is looking really good post-rotation. Well, that was like the first not tribal deck that we've done in this video, so let's get back to tribal real quick. We're going to talk about dragons for a minute here at number 5. This is actually the last tribal deck on the list. Everything else from here on out is really very, very serious. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm still excited for dragons. I think this might be the best tribe post-rotation. Much better than dinosaurs, which actually didn't make the list. More on that later. I've actually already talked about it in previous videos, but a little bit more on that later. I think that dragons is looking really well positioned, mostly because Nicol Bolas is going to be a big fish in a really small pond come autumn. We lose a bunch of cards, but it's pretty obvious that Nicol Bolas is still very playable. And I think the mana is going to be pretty good to play him too, right off the bat, because both the Izzet Guild and the Dimir Guild, blue-red and blue-black, are in Guilds of Ravnica, and we'll probably get some good dual lands. I'd bet a lot of money on that. So possibly shock lands, but who knows? But we'll get some good duels in that set. So the mana's still looking pretty good to play Nicol Bolas, but there's also the argument that you'll play Sarkhan in that deck as your 3-drop to really help make sure that you nail Nicol Bolas. In that deck, you could also play Demanding Dragon, even Bone Dragon, which has proven much better than people originally thought it would. Or you could dip into even another color to play things like Palladium Moors or Vivectus Asmati if you really wanted to. But Dragons is just looking like a really, really solid list, just based on the shell of Sarkhan, Nicol Bolas, and the shock lands or dual lands that we're almost guaranteed to get in this Ravnica set. So I think Dragons is actually looking serious, even though we lose Glorybringer. Demanding Dragon is a good enough substitute that I think the deck rolls on or really becomes what it never was in the first place, which is a truly tribal deck. We've seen some decks that play Sarkhan into Nicol Bolas already have some success in this format. Little bits of success, but success nonetheless. And I think that that's going to be even more prevalent after rotation. And I'll bring this up too. We get Spit Flame, which is not as good as Chandra or Glorybringer, but it's still a relatively easy and instant speed, by the way for red to deal 4 damage to a target, which is going to be very important post-rotation. I've already mentioned Cumena, but there are a bunch of other creatures with 4 toughness. Leonin Warleader mentioned that too, but I'll bring you a couple more as we go through the list. And in fact, Nicol Bolas is one of them. That has 4 toughness, and Spit Flame can take that out. Not to mention that when you play a Bolas or Demanding Dragon, you can get Spit Flame back, and that's actually really, really good. A lot of games I've played on Arena, getting back a Spit Flame is a game-altering thing to be able to do. Not to mention, before I get out of here on Dragons, I should point out too that Dragon's Horde is ridiculous. The card isn't it's not broken or anything, obviously, but anyone who's played with Dragon's Horde, which is a lot of people. I'm not the only one playing Dragons on Arena. I've come up against a lot of people. And Dragon's Horde will draw you, 2-3 cards over the course of the game, plus ramp you and fix your mana. The card is much more serious than it initially appeared. It's not one of the best cards in the set or anything, but it is a much better card than it looks like. Now let's get into the real-ish, starting with number 4, Stompy. Now, I'm not going to lie, this does lose a couple of pieces, but I don't think it loses anything really, really important. I think the worst thing this loses, really the best thing this loses, is Heart of Kiran. It's good that this deck has a quick flyer that can also help get a Galta out very fast. I think it's going to hurt to lose Heart of Kiran, especially because the deck really wants an effective flyer. But aside from that, not really much. The basic shell, I guess we lose Ronus, but whatever. And I mean it, but whatever. The basic shell of, Llanowar Elves, Steel Leaf Champion, Galta, and even Vinemare, all those cards still exist and are still just as good as they ever were, if not better, actually, when rotation hits. So I think that Stompy is still going to occupy a place of prominence in the format. But we've hit the top 3, and this is probably where you're going to start not liking me, but I'm just trying to be honest with you here. I think number 3 might seriously be Nexus of Fate. If we're talking about decks that are still important come rotation, decks that are still top tier or maybe tier 2 after rotation hits, I think Nexus of Fate is definitely in the conversation. It loses a fog, really not much else. I know it's ostensibly a fog deck, but it's already been proven that you can just use Settle the Wreckage as basically a 4-mana fog that lasts for multiple turns. It's also a Wrath. So, I don't really think that deck loses a whole heck of a lot. And obviously, if they print a fog, they print one or 2 mana fog, or even if they just reprint fog in the next set, then it's just the deck doesn't lose anything. It's still got all of its pieces. Still got Nexus, still got Teferi, still got Karn, and there's, Settle the Wreckage, still got Root Snare. It's just really It doesn't lose much, guys. And even if it doesn't get another fog, it's got the Settle the Wreckage. It can always play like more copies of Karn's Temporal Sundering, because at this point, the deck will often play one copy of, KTS, and that's because when you hit Karn's Temporal Sundering on a turn where you're looking for Nexus of Fate, it's almost just as good as hitting a Nexus of Fate. So the deck might up it to 2 copies, because it's pretty easy to cast as long as you've got your Teferi or your Karn locked into place. So I really don't think this deck loses a whole lot of pieces. I know everybody hates it. Maybe there'll be some kind of hate printed for it. Maybe Burn gets better somehow. Maybe we get that 1-drop red wizard that keeps Wizard's Lightning super relevant, keeps the Burn deck relevant, and thus helps keep Nexus of Fate out of the format. I hope that all that happens, but it's not looking super good. The deck does not lose too many pieces. Regardless of whether hate comes along for it, the deck is still playable. Now, number 2 is a little bit surprising, even for me, honestly. But number 2 is green-white mid-range. Now, I just think this deck looks good enough already to be a contender, and it doesn't lose like anything. It just doesn't lose anything, and it really benefits, too, from a lot of the removal leaving the format. Fatal Push won't ever hit Resplendent Angel anymore. You don't have Chandra or Glorybringer to take out Shalai, which is enormous. There's no unlicensed disintegration to take out Lyra, and yeah, there's still Murder, but Murder is just not as good of a card. You're just not going to see 4 copies of Murder in a deck like you do unlicensed disintegration. So most of their creatures get better for one reason or another. Resplendent Angel, Shalai, Lyra, they all get much, much better. And if green-white can get some really choice stuff at the lower end of the curve, which you could argue it already has, then I just see this deck really taking off. Now, I guess you could make the argument this is a tribal deck. Most of the creatures I've named at this point have been angels, but the deck could also play like Vine Mare, Lawnmower Elves. There are lots of choices for, green cards to play. So that your green mana has some sort of factor other than Shalai's ability. The deck could play Adventurous Impulse. That'll help you find your angels and lower the land count. There are lots of reasons to play green in this deck, and most of the cards I've just named also get better after rotation for that matter. So really, really look out for green-white mid-range. I think its time may have finally come. It's got all the pieces it needs, but all the pieces holding it down, they're gone. But we've hit number 1, and again, you'll probably hate me, but I'm a truth teller. I tell it like it is. I think I do. But all my sources tell me that number 1 is going to be blue-white control. And I know that people hate control, but there's also people that love control. Control is an archetype. It has a right to exist, and it's existed since like 1993. It's not going anywhere. It's a mainline archetype. So people that hate control, like, I'm sorry, but it's here. It's here to stay. It's been here forever. It's not some sort of cancer. It's a deck. Wizards wants it to be a deck. It deserves to be a deck. So I'm sorry if you hate my number 1 here. And I used to be a control player myself. I like to call myself a reformed control player. But still, all that said, I think the objective choice for number 1 is, sorry to say, blue-white control. It just really doesn't lose much. It loses some, like, blue card draw, but I'm inclined to believe that's going to be replaced, honestly. We'll probably get a decent replacement for Glimmer of Genius, but look at the shell for blue-white control that still exists. Obviously, Teferi is still in the format, and he's probably, all things considered, I will say that Teferi is probably the best card in the format post-rotation. Again, not having seen anything from Guilds of Ravnica, but just based on what survives rotation, Teferi might be the single most powerful card in the entire format. People are going to try to figure out ways to utilize them. Blue-white control is probably the best way to do that. So we still have Teferi. We still have Settle the Wreckage. I've mentioned that card a bunch of times. It's going to be really important for killing Vine Mares, Carnage Tyrants. These, it's going to be just about the only answer for those outside of cards like Cleansing Nova, which will have to, replace Fumigate, which is also a big deal. The deck gets Karn if it wants it. It still has Search for Iskanta, which is also part of a shell that's just hard to beat. Search for Iskanta is another one of the most powerful cards in the entire format right now, much less come rotation when the pond gets much, much smaller. Search for Iskanta just looks ridiculous. So I just don't think that blue-white loses any of its most powerful pieces, which are already some of the most powerful cards in the format. So suffice to say, and sorry to say, I really don't think this deck is going anywhere. But that's my list, for the time being at least. And there were some things I didn't talk about that I wanted some time for. Like, this was almost a top 15 list, because I think the decks like Zombies get a little bit better, especially with Scrap Heap Scrounger rotating and Graveyard Marshal becoming the new Scrap Heap for all intents and purposes. But the deck does lose some stuff like Dread Wanderer, Liliana's Mastery, and I think that's going to matter a lot. Also, kind of want to shout out Green-Red Monsters, which is the entire reason that Dinosaurs didn't make the list. I just think that the actual payoffs for playing Dinosaurs are kind of few and far between. Oh, love you too, Ziggy. But, in any case, I think that the payoffs for playing Dinosaurs are some of the weakest of any of the tribes, but the Dinosaurs themselves are really, really good, you know? And another reason I don't think Dinosaurs are particularly great after rotation is because in the 4-drop slot, we've got like Rekindling Phoenix, Vine Mare for the green-red deck, and they're just way better choices than any of the Dinosaurs that we're looking at currently. So I think Green-Red Monsters is the deck that Green-Red Dinosaurs wants to be, and it's just like 1,000 times better. So Dinosaurs didn't make the list, but Green-Red Monsters almost did. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about is that I kind of have a feeling that red-white mid-range is going to be a deck post-rotation, but that is literally a feeling, and it's not based on like any actual factual evidence. Like, it might be the best way to use Rekindling Phoenix. You know, that deck will also have Ixalan's Binding and a bunch of really good stuff, removal-wise, period. Plus some, you know, some very desirable creatures to play, you know, to say the least. So, you know, it gets Karn to draw cards if it wants it. So I think red-white mid-range might be a thing, but again, that's just my feeling, and that doesn't really count towards much. But I at least wanted to bring that up as a possibility. But in any case, that is my list now, and I'm tapped out. But it's your turn. Let me know in the comments section how you feel about this, because I get the feeling this is going to be a pretty controversial list, and that a lot of people are going to hate some of these choices. But again, I'm trying to give it to you objectively. You know, I'm not. There's no bias here. This is what I think the format's going to look like based on the evidence we have at present. So don't take it personally or anything, but let me know how wrong I am down there in the comments and point out any decks that I didn't point out. Aside from that, make sure that you click the first link in the description as usual. Head over to my sponsors at TCG Player. You can go ahead and buy pre-ordered sealed product for Guilds of Ravnica. That's pretty good, considering especially spoilers are going to start coming out any day now, and booster boxes sometimes go up in price after spoilers start coming out, so there's that to consider. But you can also buy, you know, any of the cards I talked about on the list that are almost certainly going to get better post-rotation. Go ahead and start making your decks, any of that stuff. It's all valid, but honestly, just clicking on the link helps the channel out, so if you want to help me out in a pretty easy way, just click the link. Just click the link. They like when they see people clicking the link, so do that. But in any case, do all the other stuff that doesn't really take you much effort but helps me out tremendously. Like the video. Giving me the thumbs up puts me in more recommended feeds. Share the video around. This is probably information that needs to be, you know, not only widely disseminated but widely criticized. I'm open to that. In any case, share it around. Do all the other YouTube stuff. You know, subscribe if you're new. You haven't seen my face yet, but you like my content. Hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell for the notifications. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and if you really want to help keep the lights on and keep me doing this amazing thing for a living that I get to do, just hop on over to the Patreon, link in the description, and throw me $1 a month. That's all I ask. I'll give you a kiss, Jiggy. Well, I don't think you want a kiss. But anyway, you'll get to see more kitty kisses. $1 a month on Patreon's all I ask. Hit the link. But in any case, I'm pretty sure that I'm done for this one. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Don't hurt me down there. Spread love and be kind.